This is the Weigh-In Podcast by Ben, Watt, Chestnut, and normally Special Merrill. But as we now know, it's no longer at some point, it's at when he can. So as you know, he was on our last episode, joined us up, gave us the update, and enjoyed it. So this week's weigh-in, or as in many pretenses we say, this week's Takedown Thursday. So we're going to recap that U17 World Championships, morally giving you some of the champs. And then we will continue off of last week's mental patience. What is the next build of wrestling? So we will continue with that, along with whatever else comes up during the talk of the episode. So with that being said, that is this week's plan. Or Takedown Thursday. So with that being said, as we get into this U17, we're gonna run right through that because the mental is a little longer today. So USA beats Iran, which is they win the U17 title, which is crazy. You got Jaden James, who got gold. You got Sammy Sanchez, who repeats as a world champ. You got Keegan Bassett, who wins world gold. We got Gary Burnett with a bronze. We got Arninsky with a silver. We got Tiana Fernandez with gold. Ariane Mills with gold. We got Morgan Turner. We got Calkins Jr. with a bronze. And a plethora of everybody else. So that's just a short. We're not giving you a full breakdown. That, as I always say, Google it. We were just giving you a little bit to say, the performance of that U17 USA team. And that is fairly interesting. That we're getting a really good Team USA. And we talked about this before on the pod that, the up and coming is really good. And we talked about that and to go in and win the U17 is really good. It is a really good thing to have happen. And we look at that and we wonder if will that play a role in the near future, and to say that Team USA is looking like it's in good hands. Yeah, I think so. You still got a lot of guys that are still going to be on Team USA. A lot of guys still got a lot of wrestling left in them. Like Kyle Dick, Jordan Burroughs, they're not done yet. They got a lot of wrestling left in them, and that's a really good thing. It's a really good thing that goes on. That is really good. In terms of that. Now, another thing flying around the wrestling news, Penn adds Lennox Wolak as an assistant coach. So you can see some coaching moves have been made, and you're seeing a lot more people take positions that they wouldn't have, and I think that's fairly interesting as to what we're seeing. And that's really good. In terms of just for that university, and that's a really good thing going on. Or for Penn, that's a really good thing. So that's something that's fairly interesting to go on. Good for Penn, and all these coaching changes looking really well. One of the things, as we've ventured kind of across in this epi, one of the things we're going to bring up is Last week we talked about mental patience. Before on the podcast, we talked about, one's being their best self when they're out there. And now we will bring across and talk about which I kind of feel is the kind of the last step is one's gotta feel confident enough to go out there, and that goes along with the best self. Um, you know, all of what goes on in the sport of wrestling is, everybody loves to say, oh, well, you just take people down, it's easy. It's not easy. Wrestling builds a lot of character, and that's why wrestling is such a great sport for the way it is, because the character that builds out of it is just immaculable. It's tremendous. It's great. There's things that, a lot of wrestlers will learn and understand that just are very well that translate into life skills. And if you're not, many that aren't wrestlers won't understand, the idea. Our boxers will, but some of us that aren't may not, and that's okay. If you really don't, I would say Google it. That's something to break down at a later date. But nonetheless, a really good thing for us wrestling wise is, hey, what can we not do? And it just kind of, wrestling has built itself into all the rules changes that come over the years. It has really built itself into a really great sport, and that's just something I was gonna get out there. But nonetheless, if we stick back to the performance side of going on, you know, injuries will happen, and that's one thing that people generally don't understand. Injuries will happen. It's how you recover from them that makes the difference. And not all injuries are the same. So on today's non-mental or non-performance, non-professional performance talk that we always give, I think, today's talk is injuries and how people build better than that. And I think this will be paired with injuries and losses. Some wrestlers don't know how to take loss well. And that's not all some. Once you lose, it's how you bounce back from the loss. So, and a revengeful loss is not always what you would think. So, I don't know what pops into anybody else's first head, but I will just explain that one here down to the points. A revengeful loss is okay. You get beat at said tournament, whatever. When you see them again, you beat them. You seek the win. So, that's one of the first things. And I think, we talked about this before, that minute by minute or second by second wrestling, that if you're not winning that per second, you have to make it up. So, you get taken down in the first 10, well, you got to make it up. You got to get out front, and you got to control the match. And a lot of people don't understand wrestling your match. The best matches you're going to win is ones where your opponent are uncomfortable, where they feel they can't get to their offense. They can't feel to get their grooves going. They can't get into what they want. And that's the difference, because if you're somebody that has a lot of movement and you're very good at what you're able to do, is as in the minute those hands are on the wrestler, you already know what attack you're looking for. That is what we call very well a good wrestling trait. That's what I call a good wrestling trait. Somebody that has done that knows their number one attack, and you get right to your number one, right to it. And there's a lot of wrestlers, I'll say wrestlers, that do this very well. Spencer Lee is indeed one of them. How quickly he gets to a takedown. But you look at a lot of those wrestlers that score quick takedowns, and that really tells you the answer to how some of them are able to transition, is the word I'll use, into wrestling. The transition of wrestling is fairly up there. For what you have to do, the transition of wrestling is very up there, and there's not much wrestling wise that goes on. But the transition of wrestling, fairly good. It's out there. It's really good. So that's an interesting partake of wrestling, is that, that very quick getting to your shot is interesting. Some guys, they have, you know, 4 or 5 shots that they can get to, and that's good too. But when you have a good solid number one, and I'm saying a good solid 1 and 2, a good 1 and 2 will get it. Your one doesn't work, they're quick on the two. That all will play a huge role in difference, and that's important to have a good 1 and 2 and to know how to get to your 1 and 2 multiple ways. A lot of people have number one. You can't always set the number one up the same way. Then everybody knows, okay, this is what they do more than once. But if you set it up 5, 6 different ways, then they're like, all right, well, I know that this is an attack they have. I just don't know how they're going to set it up, and that creates some doubt in your opponent to, I don't know what they're going to shoot, because also if you set up your A, B, and maybe a couple other shots the same way, they have no idea what attack you're going for. A lot of the things I talked about is misdirection. Misdirection is something that when it is done correctly, it looks amazing. A good misdirection, seeing it at the college level is just absolutely amazing. Seeing it, to see that. So it's just really well to what happens and to what doesn't. It's really good in terms of what goes on and what doesn't. It's just a very well thought out thing. And I think the thought process of being able to have a good 1 and 2 attack is really well. So it's the building blocks of wrestling, it's the building blocks of wrestling, just the same way, like, I'm sure we all get this question. They say, why wrestle? Wrestle because it builds so much character. It builds a lot of character, and it teaches things that that you can't get in some sports. Wrestling has a team aspect, but primarily is set up in a format where a lot of it is individual. And you look at that and you say, okay, mental patience. When we talked about it last week, was all about this mental patience. I talked about how you have mental patience in basketball, and you do, but if you have a bad night, they pass somebody else the ball. In wrestling, sometimes at the high school level and at some of these teams don't have like 5, 6 guys a weight class deep. They might have that one guy. And, at the end of the day, if it's not like college, you kind of can, but even then, that's why you pass somebody else the ball. In the end of the day, they may make that shot. They're more than likely to make the shot. Wrestling, you gotta have mental patience, because there's not somebody you can't say, okay, I didn't get my shot. Next guy up, I can pass him to do the takedown. No, so it's that aspect of where it really plays a role that wrestling teaches things that you just can't get elsewhere. Everything happens. There's a next man up mentality in terms of most sports. When you look at the model of wrestling, you have that in a team aspect, but at the end of the day, it's you that's got to get the win. It's you. Nobody else can get it for you. They could put another guy out there, but that doesn't mean they're going to get the victory. That doesn't mean, there's a lot of analogies in that, or there's a lot of analogies in terms of that point, and there's a lot of potential. This could happen, that could happen in that, because there's just so much that could go. There's so many variables in situations like that, and I just think you just can't go under that way and say, hey, this is versus another. Most sports, every sport has a skill or something it can teach you, but it's just a brute and mental toughness of wrestling is very up there, because it takes a special kind to do it, even more special than football, because you have the weight cutting aspect, and you have, for some of the top guys, you're probably wrestling every day of the week, if not already. You're practicing at clubs, you're out at tournaments every weekend. It puts a lot of pressure on most to be doing the wrestling things that get done. And at the end of the day, it's not to say that it's a bad thing. It's a good thing, because it teaches a very big form of discipline that you can't just get every in any other sport. The disciplines learned in wrestling are very hard to teach. They're just learned in wrestling. It's learned to go to practice 4 or 5 times and really build yourself up to understand if you don't get your shot the first time, shoot it again. Not working, go to B, shoot B again. Keep shooting till either he gets a stall call or you get in on the legs, you get a takedown. You continue to attack, and that's the terms of wrestling. There are some that get on that mat and they really want to be there. They want it more than anything. And there's others that get on that mat and they're kind of like they're there. They're not really performing at the level they should be because they're just kind of like, hey, I'm here because my dad did this, or I'm here because this and that. And I'm not saying there's any one instance, or I'm not saying I've heard anything like that, but a lot of athletics come from just, hey, my parents did this, my parents did that. And that's really great, but performance-wise, it doesn't always create the best performance. Now, that's not the case for all cases. That doesn't mean in every case that's the case. It's kind of just, hey, the case is that, you've gotta want it to be at the highest form of something, any sport, you gotta want it. It can't be something somebody wants for you because you'll never perform the way you're supposed to, because if you're there because you want it, you're going to perform differently than you're there because somebody wants you there. It's very different. And I think in very well terms of that provides a lot of things that are different, for most. So getting back to, does this, shooting attack, your first attack, your best attack, shooting A all the time, shooting attack A, takedown A all the time, will that make any effect? No, but it'll help somebody get more confident. And I think that's a better terms of word we can use here, is being more confident on your shooting. Because a lot of wrestlers, where you see the lousy shot, the best thing you can do is fully commit to the shot. You're in there, fully commit to it. That's what we learned with that Wyatt Henderson and Gable Steveson NCAA final. You see, when he took his last shot, that shot winning, that takedown winning shot, that match winning, he committed very well to it. That to the point where when he started to not get the shot, he didn't back out. He committed very well. He adjusted himself. He made sure he could adjust well to still get that shot. And when you're shooting a shot, if you don't commit fully to the shot, it's lousy. That's when you're going to get a huge reattack. And that's a whole nother thing going across. The reattack. A really good reattack creates great defense. If you see you can see some wrestlers have some good reattack. Like I know Yanni in college had it real good. I know Vito Arujau is another one that's got some good reattack. That you'll see a few of their matches, they can get it really well. I know Sammy Alvarez, not fully, but there's some matches where you can see he's got some good reattack. But a lot of that you'll see in some of those NCAA finals. If you're not already watching the Division I NCAA finals, there's so much you can learn from it. And I think it just, in terms of just, we're breaking down the building blocks here of wrestling. We're trying we're getting to, if you already aren't doing some things that you can, to better your wrestling, we're just kind of throwing ideas out there. And, it's this kind of thing where it's like, hey, you take what you want from these episodes. If you want to go and say, what, let me watch the NCAA finals and see, what takedown, what was the most shot takedown, what were some things that worked for those guys? I can try those in practice. Either way, it doesn't matter. Everybody will always learn what they can. You jot notes, you'll listen to this and hear something or make you think of something that you might be able to do. End of the day, everything is just thoughts and ideas. It's always just thoughts and ideas. And for what we do here, we try to make sure that we provide you with episodes that are, in terms of that fun, you like it, a great aspect. But that's what I try to do. I mean, lately we've had these episodes where we're talking this mental, and the athlete performance, but there's reasons why we always say we're not professionals, because we're not athlete professionals, we're not mental health professionals in any way, shape, or form. So what we're providing is what we're providing here on the weigh-in is our knowledge and what we've been able to perceive of others, and what we've been able to hear in just talks with others. We've gone to numerous events and numerous stuff, and what we've been able to take. A lot of what we talked about was a lot of stuff. So I know some of last episode was just on, we talked about previous episodes being mental patients. We talked about that jiu-jitsu. We talked about a lot of that. And I think in terms that we're getting to, what's going to make some wrestlers a little better. I'm not going to say what's going to make a wrestler better, because at the end of the day, we are not wrestling coaches. We don't, I'm just a former wrestler bringing my knowledge in the way I perceive the sport and a unique perspective. Obviously everybody might not take the stance as I do, but nonetheless, it's just like I said, there are some ways to value a good wrestler. There's some ways to value wrestlers who are not performing so well, just to say, hey, there's some things they can work on. If they're a person that they don't shoot that often, well, maybe what might be able to help them is a really solid defense, and starting with the re-attack and being able to say, hey, they attack, because that is the part where most wrestlers are, I would say, I'm not going to say fully vulnerable, but the most vulnerable is in that re-attack, because when you shoot a shot, it's how you recover from that shot that you miss. If you're in a lousy recovery, not really staying, and not really staying, as one would say, on your toes. I don't mean physically on your toes. I mean, thinking on your toes and saying, hey, what's going to come next? You're not just standing up and leaving yourself all vulnerable, standing up with defense. You're standing up with, a stance that, is not going to be able to allow the re-attack. But, when you see, one thing I learned when I wrestled, if many didn't know, I'm pretty sure I probably said this already on the pod before. I was a Splato guy. I hit the Splato more times than enough. And a lot of times how I got it was off of poor shots. That's a poor shot. Like, they took a poor shot and it was just like, boom, you're going to get the Splato. It was things were okay. It was the little things that caused that poor shot. They got in deep on the leg, but poor shot. You can't shoot poorly and expect to. That was one thing with me. You can't shoot poorly and not expect me to split you up and say, hey, I got it. So that was one of the things that was able to happen. I was able to do. But like I shared on me, I shared that in my journey, I worried too much about wanting to learn and master Splato. And that it mentally cost me matches, because I was so worried about, I want to hit this play, I want to hit this, I want to hit this, that I was so worried about it, I didn't get to my offense and my wrestling the way I'm supposed to, and that's just. And the only thing I like to share with that is just don't, it's great to learn a move in practice, but don't let it overtake you. And that's what happened with the Splato for me. And I did not learn that in practice. I don't suggest this, but I learned the move off of, if many don't know, if I haven't said short, I learned the Splato off of YouTube. And that was just something that I saw of YouTube, through the feed. A YouTube video came up of a coach showing a Splato. And he said, you hit this and you'll for sure get the pin. And over that time, I tried it. And I think I put too much expenditure effort into this Plato, that if I done it in my offense on more shot taking and all this other stuff, I think there would have been a clear difference for me in terms of wrestling. And that's on me. And that's why I share my story to that too. You learn a move, but don't let it consume you. If you learn something and you try it in practice a couple times and you like it, don't let it consume you. And I think that's only possible with big moves, with things that are big. And I only say that it happens with moves that require your opponent's shooting. And my form of the Spladle, and I don't say my form, but the form I like to use Spladle, required them to shoot, and that's how I let it consume me. They would get in on a shot. And I'm not saying, I intentionally let any opponent in on my legs, but when they got in, I'm thinking Spladle, Spladle, Spladle. And yeah, I say it cost me because you should be thinking sprawl, sprawl, sprawl. And you're thinking to set up a Spladle, and then instead it's not there, and they finish and they get the takedown instead of providing heavy hips and putting a good defense down. And that's what I say. Don't, and this is only really happens in big moves where it requires the opponent to, have to do something. If it's a roll where you need their pressure when they shoot, I say, if it's big enough where you need something from them, don't let it consume you. Don't let it consume you. Because if you don't get it, you'll put yourself behind. And that's happened more than most with me. And that's something that I didn't like, and it just happened. And I think in terms of that, it's just, it's just real difficult, and it's not something that trust me from experience, not something you want to be down the road for. But there is what I would call healthy learning, and that's, you learn a move, you get it a couple times, you don't have to consume it. It's not, and I only say that's for big moves where it requires, the opponent to have some pressure, some form of something. Don't, and again, I always say, don't just take the word of the way and consult the coach. Consult your coach. First and foremost, don't take the word of the way in at any point. I would say consult the coach. More forms of wrestling, you got coaches or you got mentors, you can kind of consult on that. The weigh-in will always give you something, but it is a suggestion. Like I say, most times, this whole thing is a suggestion in most places, and it's what you take from it or what you learn from it is solely a suggestion. But I share my moments and what happened with me for many reasons, because that's the learning curve and process that I take and learn from it, and that's just what I've been able to learn. And more times than most, it had I thought some of the ways I do now, it would have probably helped me along my journey. I don't think it would have caused or stopped most of the of the small injuries or anything like that, but it would have done a little help. It would have done a little help, but nonetheless, I kind of try to keep these with you guys as if, most of the time we're in this wrestling off season. This is what I call it. We're in the college wrestling off season. And I bring to you these talks just to help develop somebody's mind enough to know that if you're in wrestling, it's a great sport, enough to know you're doing some of the right things, or enough to help somebody who might not be sure if they're doing the right things. And, and that's the thing that's able to help. As you guys know, more than most, I answer questions across that, but luckily this time it did not come in the form of a question. It was, it was more a full epi title. And I was going to bring across the wave of the defense and all, and this partake was going to be last week's Takedown Thursday, but I got the question that, I had to kind of answer. So, nonetheless, one of those things where, like I said, I tend to answer a lot of questions. If we're going to go back on this question thing, I tend to answer a lot of questions, and I do that because, I like to give people the answers they want, and that's the best way to help others. Like I said, I only suggest, but there's a lot of people that have said, oh, I have started doing this and that, I heard it first on your pod. And, to that, I tell a lot of them, I say, that's great. We're trying to help bring the best out of wrestling. We're trying to help, in most ways grow wrestling, but we're trying to bring the best out of wrestling. We're talking the good of wrestling, the great sides of wrestling. And I mean, there's so many things out there now that if we had it in high school, things would have been if I had it when I was in high school, so much different. Now you got things like Cut Pro. Cut Pro is, many don't know what that is. That's one thing I would tell you. I normally say Google it, but I would say Cut Pro. Cut Pro is is like it helps with weight cutting, and I think a lot of athletes use it, and I think it's a great thing that has come out. Cut Pro, it's amazing using Cut Pro. I don't use it, but I think it's an amazing thing to be out there now to help the wrestlers, because this will help this will help make healthy weight cutting, and that's what I mean. Healthy weight cutting is a good thing. I think it'll bring a really good thing for wrestling, that they'll have that healthy weight cutting and all of that. So with that being said, we're in the end of another episode. I'll say it like I am. Some of these episodes where I feel they're not as strong as some of the other ones that we get really good and passionate about, I do in advance always apologize, but nonetheless, I try to bring you something or some form of wrestling on these Thursdays where you can feel like you're getting something new, like coaching changes, or what's going on with the transfers, and a lot of that stuff, but it's coming to it. It's coming to it, before you know it, wrestling will be back, and the reports will be running through the roof, and somebody will be beating somebody on a Wednesday, Tuesday, or whatever the case may be. But like I said, it's just, it's that off season, and again, keep up with the questions. I see them, some of them I see most of them when I look for them. Luckily last week I got myself all caught up on questions, but I know there are some new ones because I've seen them. Not wrestling related. Those are for boxing, but those are for that combat sports. But it kind of ties in a little bit, but it's keep up with the questions. I love answering them. That's a great thing. But nonetheless, this is another epi. Like, comment, subscribe, share. This is another. We'll have the partner popping in and out of episodes, which is now we're kind of in that zone where we're easing back in. He's easing back in right now, so just bear with us, and the partner will be back, and we will be having the weigh-in as its regular scheduled program. But we are getting there for you guys. We're getting there as best we can for you guys, and the changes will be made, and in terms of that, changes in far as getting things done better, and as I say, we're still working on those special guests. We're going to continue doing that, and as we get one, as we hope to get one, that episode will be coming, and nonetheless, this is the Weigh-In Podcast by Benoit Chestnut and Sebastian Romero. And this is this week's Takedown Thursdays. Weigh-In out.
The Weigh-In, where stories ignite.